Hello everyone! Pino and Apple here with the third of the 15th Doctor novels, the end of the Series 14/Season 1 trilogy, Eden Rebellion by Abi Falassi. Last time we had Caged, a pretty good adventure which makes this one all the more disappointing. Eden Rebellion comes to the table with interesting ideas, a whole new world and both spiritual and political angles to explore, but all those ideas just don't come together well. Abi Falassi does well to get across how alien this world is, and the creativity behind it is obvious. But through the style of writing, the pacing and story structure, I just found myself reading out of obligation. I'm trying really hard to be critical without being cruel, as I hate when I have to review something that clearly has good intentions but doesn't work, as opposed to something cheaply slapped together, but this is very much the former and not the latter. Starting with the characters, 15 has an interesting part in the story, constantly on the back foot as the villain confuses and at points roofies him, which makes him act kind of out of character. And while the justification is there, that in many moments, plus a lot of dialogue options, didn't sit well with me. I wasn't really interested in the Doctor or the adventure. He tries consistently to make the bloodless solutions work, and opposing him with a force that seeks to sow discord and violence matches well. But in the end, his sheer inability to make any headway until the third act gets repetitive and feels like playing for time, him constantly sitting there going, what does this mean? Why can't I do this? Making you really feel that this is the longest of the Series 14 novels. Now, while I felt that Ruby has been overall really well explored in the last two books, here once again, I didn't feel much from her before the third act. There she's entertaining, makes interesting comments, but my biggest gripe is that by the end, I just don't feel like she did anything. Sure, she gets roofied similar to the Doctor, but she's the damsel in distress twice, and even though part of the third act mostly just adds comments to explain what's going on as the Doctor stands between the Empire and the Yueh. We have a few other characters, but only a few really stand out as comment-worthy. The first being an in-love, but separated by their duties couple, Maya and Nazari, each with important station in US society, and although more characterization would have been nice, their story is compelling, and the way the relationship drama is woven into the main plot is really well done. But Nazari was mostly seen from the perspectives of the other characters, and while Maya could be frustrating at times in her kind of depressive personality, overall positive but nowhere near as compelling as the giant hamster people from Caged. And of course, what's a Doctor Who story without the villain, Prince Laurie, or really the Empire? The story of the Empire is really interesting. Kubuntu, the god/original creator of the Yueh and its people, first created the Empire, and thinking that making it was a mistake. Through the story, the Empire has been manipulating events by shapeshifting and creating shadow clones, fucking with the Doctor, and feeding off of the hatred, animosity, and chaos. It's a really nice idea. The scope of the villain and the sort of murder mystery type reveal in the third act works well. But I do have a major problem with the Empire, and that sure, it can shapeshift and impersonate, but it also creates more bodies, pretending to be Bia vigilantes that attack the Yueh, or some of the local defense system wraiths to confuse. And it just feels like a bit of a cop-out. The villain can be anyone, any amount of anyone, at any time. And in a different setting that could be used really well, like John Carpenter's The Thing. But in a more sort of murder mystery, political intrigue story, it feels like a lazy cop-out. That all these lingering questions you speculate about have such an out-of-left-field, overpowered, and never in your right mind expected answer. So basically the whole first chapter is Ruby and 15 discussing going on holiday. That's the whole chapter. And something that becomes very clear in this first chapter is the multitude of obvious references, from Dickens to the times the Doctor strangely had one heart. It's not as obvious or cheap feeling in the rest of the story, and it does show that this author obviously has a large knowledge and love of the source material. But at the beginning, it's really in your face. So Ruby and 15 land on Yueh, going to its famed resort, and there are multiple times, thanks to the effects the planet's atmosphere, food, and water have, Ruby and 15 basically get drugged. And it's really uncomfortable. The food is a pick-me-up, the water makes you uncaring, the atmosphere can have multiple effects, and it starts the world building of how sort of psychedelic and ethereal the planet and its relationships are. But it's just kind of frustrating and creepy. There are Bia and Yua people, multiple groups that attack each other, Ruby being kidnapped and is returned during the next fight, the Doctor getting little done in between, as thanks to the Empire's machinations, none of the mysteries have satisfying or calculable answers. 15 meets Prince Laurie at the resort that they came to stay in, built in the Society's sacred gardens, which is used well in the way it affects the Society. And honestly, due to the lack of the ethereal and spiritual aspects, Laurie and the rest of the Bia are a more well-constructed society, more easily understandable than the Yua. There's a love triangle of sorts between Laurie, Maya, and Nazari, which initially I wasn't interested in, but in the third act, as they're about to solve the whole crisis and bring peace back, it's revealed Laurie is the Empire, having been manipulating everyone for maximum discord. And while this aha moment works, it kinda comes out of nowhere. There is very little build-up or even any hints to what the Empire is or its presence for most of the book. Maya and Nazari literally beat the Empire with True Love's kiss, which is nice, the Bia return home to their people, and the other opposing force, the Yua Firebrand, were barely a force thanks to the Empire, so any local unrest is essentially waved away. The resort is going to be torn down and the story ends with 15 and Ruby realizing they can't sit still and need to adventure again. Right, so that was Eden Rebellion. Admittedly a cut down retelling, but although creative and in another world would have been great, as it is, this was really disappointing. The villain is a good idea, but campy and plot-wise is a cheap cop-out. The writing style, while getting across a lot of the more ethereal and existential emotional experiences, its references are obvious and get so bogged down in trying to build up the Yua and Bia history and society that it feels like wading through a swamp. I wanted to like it, there are redeeming qualities, but in the end, it just wasn't pleasant to read. And I hope that if Abby comes back to Doctor Who, they'll bring just as much creativity, but in a more digestible and better paced package. I'll have to give the third Series 14 novel, Eden Rebellion by Abby Falassi, a very unfortunate 3 out of 10. I recommend Ruby Red, definitely Caged, but unfortunately I just can't recommend Eden Rebellion. And that honestly makes me really sad. Thank you everybody for watching my kinda depressing review of Eden Rebellion. Please like the video if you liked it, comment down below if you wish, consider subscribing to the channel, and if you do, ring the notification bell so that you're told every single time that I make an upload. Once again, thank you for watching and I will see you in the next review. Bye!
Toast. A little piece of toast. Because there's so much to choose from. There's brown bread, white bread, all sorts of wholemeal bread. It comes in funny packages with writing on the side.